Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Aliens. Now, Aliens came out in 1986, and this, of course, is a sequel to the 1979 horror science fiction classic Alien, which was directed by Ridley Scott. Now, Aliens was written and directed by James Cameron, who before this directed Piranha 2: The Spawning and The Terminator, which is the film that really did put him on the map, and after this he would go on to direct movies like The Abyss and Terminator 2 and Titanic and True Lies and Avatar. And before this, James Cameron also did the production design for a Roger Corman movie called Galaxy of Terror. Now, what's kind of ironic about that is the movie Galaxy of Terror, it's not necessarily an Alien ripoff, but you could tell that movie was definitely made to cash in on the success of Alien, so I find it to be kind of ironic that before doing an actual Alien sequel, James Cameron worked on a film that was essentially made as a cash-in on Alien. Now, Aliens is considered to be one of the greatest movie sequels ever made. Like, it's right up there with sequels like The Godfather Part 2, or The Empire Strikes Back, or Dawn of the Dead, or The Road Warrior, or Terminator 2, or The Dark Knight. Like, it's one of those sequels that a lot of people do consider to be better than the original. Now, I really don't want to say I think this movie is better than the original, because to me this movie is such a radically different film from the first one that to me it's really not fair to compare the two movies, because both this and Alien are such radically different films that it really, in my opinion, is not fair to compare the two. The first one, Alien, was very much a horror film. This one is much more of an action film, even though it does have horror movie elements in it. But to me, Aliens is one of the most perfect sequels ever made, because it does something that I frankly think more sequels should do. It stays in continuity with the first one, but still very much makes it a creature of its own, makes it a very different film than the first one, and also makes it where you can easily watch this one without having to watch the first one. Now, this is actually the first Alien movie I ever saw, and at the time I saw it, I didn't even know it was a sequel. I first saw this movie, I think I was like maybe 6 or 7 years old, and my aunt had it on VHS tape, and she showed me the movie and told me what it was about, and of course, even at that age, I was really into horror and science fiction films, so the 6-year-old me was like, I have to see this movie, and of course, I saw the movie, absolutely loved it, but at that time, I didn't even know it was a sequel to another movie, and of course, as I got older, I saw the other Alien movies, like Alien Resurrection, and the first one, and Alien 3. So, the plot of Aliens is it's set 57 years after the events of the first movie. Now, at the end of the first movie, Ripley was the last surviving member of the crew of the Nostromo because the alien killed all the other crew members, and at the end of that movie, Ripley managed to destroy the alien. So, in this movie, you realize that that escape shuttle that Ripley escaped onto at the end of the first one got lost in space and has been floating around in deep space for 57 years, and Ripley, she was sleeping in a hypersleep chamber, which is how she did not age, and so these people, they find her, and she wakes up and finds out that she's been asleep for 57 years. So Ripley, she tells these people about what happened to her and about the alien, and they of course don't believe her. And she eventually finds out that there has actually been a human colony living on the planet that the Nostromo landed on in the first movie, and it turns out they have been living there for like 20 years, setting up these big machines to make the air on that planet breathable for humans. So eventually in the movie, the people at this space station that Ripley is at, they lose contact with the human colony that has been living on this planet, and they start to think that maybe Ripley was right. So in the movie, the military ends up sending these colonial marines to this planet, and Ripley of course comes along because she's the only one who has actually dealt with these things before. And when they get to this planet, they find out that pretty much this entire human colony has actually been wiped out by the aliens, all except for this little girl named Rebecca who they find, who goes by the nickname Newt in the movie. And in the film, Ripley and Newt start to develop kind of like a mother-daughter kind of relationship. So eventually in the movie they become stuck on this planet with the aliens, and it turns out that there's this evil corporation called Weyland-Yutani who actually want to get their hands on an alien so they can weaponize it. Now, Aliens is a classic movie. It really is. Like, this is a great freaking movie. Not even as a sequel, but it really does work as a standalone movie, and as a standalone movie, it is a really, really good film. Now, one thing that I really do love about this movie, that I do think this movie has over the first one, is in this one, I feel like the character of Ellen Ripley is a lot more fleshed out as a character. In the first movie, you really didn't get a lot of character development with her character, but in this one, I feel like she's a much more well-rounded character and a much more fleshed out character. Now, I have Aliens on the Alien Quadrilogy box set. Now, this box set comes with two versions of the movie, the theatrical version and then the special edition. Now, I will admit, I've seen the theatrical version more times than I've seen the special edition, but I do think the special edition is superior to the theatrical version in a lot of ways, mainly because it has a lot more scenes in it that really do develop Ripley as a character. For example, in the special edition of this movie, there's a scene which is actually a really important scene, but unfortunately they cut it out of the theatrical version, but there's a scene in the special edition where Ripley is trying to find out what happened to her daughter. Now, you realize that her daughter was a little girl when Ripley first went up into space before the events of the first movie, but she promised her daughter that she'll be home for her daughter's 11th birthday, and she finds out that her daughter actually died of old age at the age of 66, and it's a really heartbreaking scene, and that scene also explains what Ripley's connection to Newt is, because you really do get the idea that Ripley sees a little bit of her daughter in Newt. And this movie actually has some really likable characters, like the Colonial Marines. They are actually some very likable characters and very memorable characters as well. Like, perhaps my favorite character in this movie is the character of Hudson, played by Bill Paxton, and he really is a great character. Like, what I liked about him is, in the beginning of the movie, he's very cocky, and he acts like this big military badass, but then when shit actually starts to hit the fan, he completely breaks down and pretty much becomes a big pussy, pretty much, but he's still a likable character. And of course, everybody remembers that line from the movie where he goes, "Oh, game over, man, game over." And he really is a great character, and he has some really great lines in the movie. Like, one of my favorite lines of his is in the beginning when Ripley is telling all these colonial marines about the xenomorphs. Like, right before she tells them about the xenomorphs, he goes to his commanding officer going, "How long do I have to stay in this chicken shit outfit?" He's a really, really likable character, and a lot of the colonial marines in this movie are actually very likable characters. And in the movie, you have the character of Hicks, played by Michael Biehn, who is also a really likable character, and in the movie, it kind of hints that there might be some kind of romantic relationship developing between him and Ripley, but they don't really touch on it too much. It just kind of hints at that. But Hicks, he is a really likable character, and Michael Biehn does do a really good job at playing him. Now, originally, the character of Hicks was actually going to be played by James Remar, and for some reason or another, James Remar dropped out of the project, so it ended up being Michael Biehn playing the character of Hicks. Now, another one of my favorite characters in this movie is the character of Bishop, played by Lance Henriksen. Now, I'm a huge Lance Henriksen fan. I think he's a criminally underrated actor, and he plays the character of Bishop in this movie just beautifully, in my opinion. Now, Bishop is an android, and at first Ripley does not trust him at all, because there was also an android in the first movie who ended up being evil, so Ripley thinks that Bishop is just gonna turn out to be the same way, but Bishop ends up being a very likable character in this movie, and really a very awesome character. And one thing I really do like about Bishop is there's something almost childlike about him. Like, there's almost like a childlike innocence to Bishop. Like, he's actually a genuinely good character. Like, he's not evil at all. Like, he's actually he's a genuinely good person, even though he's not actually a person. He really does come off as being a very human character, even though you realize he's actually a cyborg. Now, even though Aliens is much more of an action film than a horror film, there are some genuinely creepy moments in this movie. Like, in the beginning of the movie, Ripley has this nightmare where a baby alien is about to burst out of her stomach, and it's a really creepy scene in the movie. Also, later on in the movie, when these colonial marines first encounter the xenomorphs, that is actually a really creepy scene as well, where they're all going down into the alien's nest, and they're all cocky, thinking that they're gonna kick the aliens' asses, and they don't realize that they're completely unprepared to deal with these creatures. And then when the aliens first attack them, just the music that plays over that scene is just so goddamn haunting, and it's a really haunting and creepy scene. And later on in the movie, the surviving characters are barricading themselves in this room, and they have a tracking device showing that the aliens are getting closer and closer, and eventually they realize that the aliens are in the ceiling, and you have, I think it was Hicks, he goes up, he lifts one of the ceiling tiles, and you see these aliens crawling through the ceiling, and it is such a creepy scene, and I remember seeing that scene when I was a little kid and just shitting my freaking pants. So, even though this is much more of an action film, there are some genuine horror elements in this movie. And in the film, there's very much a theme of corporate corruption, because you realize that this corporation, Weyland-Yutani, they care more about getting their hands on the xenomorphs so they can weaponize them than they do the lives of these Marines. Now, one thing that's interesting about this movie is you get the heavy implication that these colonial marines have battled other alien species before the xenomorphs. Like, there's a scene towards the beginning of this movie where Hudson asks his commanding officer, is this gonna be another bug hunt? Implying that they have battled other alien species before all this, also really implying that there are all these other stories that could be told about these colonial marines. But yeah, Aliens, it's a classic movie. It's not just a great sequel, but it's a great standalone film as well. And it's not just a great horror slash science fiction slash action movie, but it's also just a great movie in general. So yeah, if you haven't seen Aliens, I highly recommend this movie. Now, after this movie, there was actually a comic book series called Aliens from Dark Horse Comics, and the Aliens comics actually act as a sequel to this movie. Now keep in mind, this was before Alien 3 came out, so before Alien 3, the comic books actually acted as a sequel to this movie, and I actually read a couple of the comic books, like, I have a few of them right here actually, and as the Aliens comics went on, they kind of went off into their own thing, and you even had Superman vs. Aliens comics, and Batman vs. Aliens comics, and Aliens vs. Predator comics. So yeah, that's my review on Aliens, and bye.